An important, sometimes even critical aspect of recovering from family scapegoating abuse is to recognize that you may have developed a false self very early in life to survive a hostile or threatening family environment. That's what I'll be talking about in today's episode of Beyond Family Scapegoating Abuse, so stick around. Hey everyone, I'm Rebecca Mandeville, family systems expert and author of Rejected, Shamed, and Blamed: Help and Hope for Adults in the Family Scapegoat Role. And those of you who have my book and have read it may already be familiar with my discussion about the development of the false self. I dedicate a chapter to it, chapter 11, which is followed up by chapter 12, which is on the true self and how we can learn to recover, reclaim, resurrect, many different R words I used in regard to being able to reconnect with your authentic self, true self nature, real self, however you like to think about it. The self that you were when you came into the world, before you were reshaped, reconditioned, and distorted through growing up in broken family ground. And I would like to share more with you about how the false self develops, how I define the false self, and why I felt this was a critical aspect of recovering from family scapegoating abuse. And my orientation as a transpersonal psychotherapist and as a certified clinical trauma professional, I do believe that we come into the world with a true self nature, that we come in as unique, distinct, one-of-a-kind beings. There will never be another one of you ever in this world. And we can be conditioned to not be at one with our true nature. Any one of you who have children, when you're looking at a newborn infant, or when you can see their eyes, look into their eyes, there's not a developed egoic identity there, but I bet you felt that you had a sense of this little being's nature. You know, there's something that comes through the eyes. I see it in animals. I mean, there's these sentient beings, and there's something there, and that something is unique to each of us. And sadly, tragically, that precious, unique, one-of-a-kind somethingness that you are can get reshaped and twisted and distorted through family scapegoating. Also, frankly, through social conditioning. You know, we help children to develop egos. We tell them the rules and the boundaries and the do's and the don'ts, and the ego develops in that sense of I-ness. But there's a lot of social conditioning happening, and the first society you're born into is your family. That's your matrix. That's your reality. That's all you know. So think of how vulnerable any small being is. They're born into these family matrices, whatever the plural is of matrix, and sink or swim. That's it. That's the reality you're going to be inundated with. And for scapegoated children who are victims of splitting within the family system, which I'll discuss more in a few minutes, and splitting in a parent's psyche, and that split lands on you, and you are the difficult one, the problem one, the needy one. Babies, infants, young children who are subjected to this sort of parental projection, instead of protection, instead of love, unconditional love, but are swimming in a parent's projection coming from their own intrapsychic splitness, which I've mentioned in other videos and I talk about in my book. You're victimized by many things at once, and all are designed to push you into separating, disconnecting, dissociating from your authentic self and existing as a false self, a functioning self, a functional self, but a self that has had to repress many aspects of who they actually are in order to survive in a rejecting environment. So many of you are very knowledgeable and savvy on complex trauma, and you understand that you have trauma responses. I discussed a fifth one last week. Many people don't know about, in case you missed it, the cry for help trauma response. But you might not be as clear that you have been possibly existing as a survival self, as a going along to get along, or functioning, marching through, surviving as you learn to do in your family, and that your traumatized parts, we could call them also exiled parts of you that also perhaps contain aspects of your nature that your family environment gave you the message was not okay, but ways of being that the parents or family in general found intolerable or different or weird. You likely got shamed for. You may have felt you were unacceptable because of these qualities. And to survive on some level, you would, the psyche is going to push those back and bury them and repress them and become whatever you need to be to survive in your family matrix. This then is how the false self develops. And although you may have survived, which of course we want to acknowledge, you paid a price for that. You may have had to give up many parts of yourself to feel like you were acceptable to your family when you are in the identified patient or family scapegoat role. As I point out in my book, this process of denying and repressing our true self is largely unconscious. Somehow children innately know when they are the offspring of personality disordered or highly dysfunctional or addicted, alcoholic, or narcissistic parents, that their personality, their full vibrancy is not going to be tolerated. And so the child can become, in a way, very small, and could develop the fawn submit trauma response, or the freeze response in particular, those two responses, or flight response, to get by. Those of you who identify more with the fight response, and I had addressed you last week when talking about the cry for help response, you may not have adapted and go along to get along if you chose to be true to your nature, to be authentic. And to be authentic was more valuable to you on some level than attachment was. You weren't willing to pay the price to have some sense of attachment, even if it was illusionary. You may have rebelled against restrictions placed on you and in your self-expression, and you then were possibly seen as mentally unstable, as I say in my book, as dangerous, different, weird, threatening, difficult, needy, needing attention, selfish, cold, unloving. You might have been seen as the narcissistic one in your family, and you might have been seen as unreasonable and rebellious. So those of you with the fight response, you paid a price also, but you may have a more firm grip on your sense of self because you didn't, on some level, capitulate and just go along to get along, fawn, submit, people please. There's no right or wrong trauma response when you're in these highly dysfunctional or narcissistic family systems. And it's so important that you commend yourself and the child that you were and your psyche for somehow allowing you to survive what could have been a dangerous and hostile environment. Instead of being protected, you may have been projected on. In the dysfunctional family system, in my clinical series here on my channel, I talked about the differences between a dysfunctional and narcissistic family system. So I won't get into details here, but in a dysfunctional family system, you may be the victim of a shared family projection that I now call holy family, the madness of the family, all believing a very distorted reality, often being driven by intergenerational trauma. In a narcissistic family system, it can be driven by a projection process going on with a narcissistic family member, typically the parent, or they could frankly be a malignant narcissist or a sociopath, and it's conscious, intentional, malevolent behavior being exhibited towards you. So here's yet another aspect of the Gordian knot that I've mentioned previously, and I talk about in my book, that knot that is family scapegoating. It's a knot that can't be unraveled or untied. There's no way out of it. You can't reason with your family as an adult scapegoated child. You can't explain your way out of being scapegoated. You can't give them my book and make them see that you're being scapegoated. And you're left with a choice: either capitulate on some level and toe the line and become what your family needs you to be, including not protesting the abuse or the maltreatment, or you stay true to yourself, and then you're going to have quite a difficult situation on your hands, because you may not have any ally, as we say in family systems, an ally, someone on your side, so to speak, who will be an advocate for you. There may not be anyone in your family who will take on that role. And you may find the entire family believes a false narrative, what I call the scapegoat narrative. And you're one against many, and it's not going to go well for you. I've had people tell me they with all sincerity, gave family members my book and thought this would be helpful. And it's not. It typically will not be, because the information's too threatening. And certainly anyone who writes a book like mine, despite my credentials, despite my being recognized as a family systems expert at this point in my career, I'm going to be the crazy therapist. I know someone who invited a family member, someone close to me invited a family member to look at my book, because this person's also in the scapegoat role, and the sibling took a look at it on Amazon and said, I'm not going to read this piece of crap. So that's typical. Didn't hurt my feelings. I wasn't surprised at all. I'm sad they weren't open to it, but most times the family's not going to be. So you're left out on a limb. You're caught in this double bind, darned if you do, darned if you don't. And you have to remember that there's no way out of that double bind other than, as I like to say, slicing through with the sword of truth, your truth, the truth of who you are. You came into this world, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, as a unique being, and you may have had to morph and twist yourself and reshape yourself within to survive. And that's just no way to go through life. And some of you wake up one day and the anger hits you, or what I call righteous rage. You may have been in the fawn, submit, people-pleasing stance for much of your life. And one day something happens and you wake up and you're angry. You can't take it anymore. Some of you are exhausted from the fight response, and everything starts to look like a fight. You're hypervigilant. You get hypervigilant of any boundary crossing. If a friend or spouse crosses a boundary, certainly you want to say something about it, but you may find that you're having a tremendous amount of anger you're displaying toward that person, and they're standing there very confused, wondering how leaving a dish towel on the floor turned into this. Well, because you're starting to access the righteous rage, or with that fight response, you may just be so tired of feeling like you have to be hypervigilant to make sure that you're not being violated. So many things can happen around trauma responses, around recognizing that you've had to reshape yourself, live as a false self, so to speak, to survive your family environment. And because we go to what we know, you may have recreated your family of origin unintentionally through who you married, or staying in a job that's not healthy, or a living situation that's not healthy because it feels familiar to you. And so it's not as you have a high tolerance for dysfunction. That's the best way to put it. It doesn't seem as urgent to get yourself out of what could be a really unhealthy situation because you're used to it.